All right, so now we're moving on to Baskaran Adhiban with white against Wesley So. From midway through the tournament, maybe round 6. And yeah, here he has white, and after playing e4, e5, bishop c4, and e4, e5, knight c3, he finally just said, yeah, I've been wanting to play the King's Gambit all along. I was hoping that, I would move order my opponent into some stupid version of the King's Gambit where they don't have any counterplay and I get to play f4 for free. Let's just do the King's Gambit, just straight up. So there it is. And the King's Gambit, despite being a very famous opening, definitely qualifies as a rare opening at the Super GM level. I don't think you'll find many other games with the King's Gambit played at Tata steel in the last like 5 to 10 years. Like you probably find like 1 or 2 here or there. I know Carlsen's played the King's Gambit at least once against Wang Yue, but it's super rare. And yeah, it may be famous, but it's mostly famous for being bad and not played. So here it is, the much maligned King's Gambit in the hands of Baskaran Adhiban, playing white against the hottest and or best player in the world at the moment, Wesley So. And like the game between Adhiban and Carlsen, this game is like very important for the final standings in the tournament. If Adhiban had won that game against Carlsen where he had the advantage, that could have propelled him into second place. And if he'd won this game against So, it could have put him into first place. So pretty important game for that tournament. And, oh yeah, also, I should note that people almost universally play knight f3 in the King's Gambit when they do play it. And generally, it's not players much better than, like, me who play the King's Gambit. Like, you'll have, like, an occasional 24, 2500 rated player who gives the King's Gambit a go. I don't know of anyone much stronger who regularly plays the King's Gambit anymore. For a while, Fedorov was playing it, but I haven't seen him play it in a while either. He got into one super tournament and got beat like 3 times by, I don't know, Anand, Shirov, and Ivanchuk or something like that, all as white. And that was kind of the last I saw of like the King's Gambit at high level. But here, Adhiban plays bishop c4, which is even like super more uncommon. Generally, it's not thought that queen h4 check is a good move for black in this position after bishop c4, even though it's certainly a playable move. The upside of it is that the white king is in the way of his own of the development of his own pieces, especially the rook on h1. The downside is white's going to gain like fully 2 tempi when they play knight f3 and you play queen to h4 and then just back to d8 is basically going to be your best square. So, depending what you do as black here, you could reach a situation where after knight f3, queen e7, d4, you try to like hold this pawn, and then if white has to play king f2, rook f1, or rook e1, it's fine because you played the queen move twice. But even before they just give back those tempos to defend the rook, you have to make sure that you can, control these squares, having moved your queen twice. And in this particular set of moves I randomly coughed up on the board, I would say it's not going to work out for black. This is going to fail and show the problem with queen h4. So I'm sure there's like better ways to play queen h4. I think usually it's still followed up with d5. But anyway, queen h4 is a move. But d5, which Wesley So plays, just throwing the pawn right back at white. This is actually, I think, the accepted Grandmasterly opening theory response to the bishop, to the bishop's opening. Yeah, Camille, I'm not saying I'm definitely not saying it's super bad. I was trying to say it was playable, but that the move played by So is the move that's considered to be best, I think, for black. So queen h4 has its up and its downsides. So bishop takes d5, and the point of this d5 break is to then play knight f6 and freeze these two, right? If you retreat your bishop, you're supposed to lose your e4 pawn, which is pretty important to white's game plan in the King's Gambit. And if you don't retreat your bishop, then at some point black can just trade it and get rid of your bishop pair, right? And eliminate one of your good attackers. So the other chat room is at chess.com/TV. And for those at chess.com/TV, the other chat room is at twitch.tv/dproofs or something like that. Anyway, sorry for the double chat room confusion. I am at least as confused as either of you and wish that there was a way to combine it, which somebody said that there might be, so we'll see. Okay, knight c3. I'll try and look that up. So knight c3 is played, strong pointing both of these. And now Wesley simply captures the knight. I suppose if he doesn't, there's a threat of white maybe bringing the bishop back to b3. But the other move that looks super, super logical to me here would be bishop to b4. By playing bishop to b4, black continues to fight for the same two squares, right? Such that, like, if you retreat the bishop, in theory, I might be able to take here. This looks really bad if you d-take, so I'm gonna b-take for black in a second. So b takes c3, grab this pawn, threatening queen h4 for real this time. So now it's either queen e2 or knight f3 that need playing. Let's just say something like this happens. Well, it's very clear that black has a playable game, right? All their pieces can come out. They got rid of white's e-pawn. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it's too clear. It could still be a complicated game. You know, white has their chances, but, you know, they need some time. They need to castle. They need to play, like, you know, d4, d3, knight e5, bishop f4. It's hard to get all these moves in without black fighting back sufficiently. So bishop b4, I think, is another important playable move here. I wonder how white responds to that, whether it's with knight e2 or with bishop b3 like we just played, giving up the e-pawn. Although I've played a ton of King's Gambit, I've played very little of the bishop c4 gambit, so I'm kind of unfamiliar even with like the very first couple moves of theory here. If knight e2 and takes and takes and takes and takes and queen h4. So now g3 doesn't look good to me. I don't see a good way to deal with this. And knight c7 is definitely not as significant as this, is it? Check. I guess king here. Check. King here. And now an extra queen. Yeah. So I guess it's got to be king f1. And then we might have to spend a move on knight a6. Might have to spend a move on knight a6, and then, I don't know, d3. You want black to just castle and sack the rook? I also want to just sack the rook like you. I ecliptic. But g3 then castle. G3 then castle. I don't know where or how you mean to do that. If you mean g3 here, and then after I take to castle, that's actually your very worst option. But you're maybe suggesting that as a joke, huh? I see your smiley face. So yeah, I mean, this whole line here, king f1, this all looks quite playable for either side, right? Knight a6, defending c7, now d3, maybe g5. And basically the game goes on. I mean, Material is equal. Material's equal. White has to fix their king a little bit. Maybe they just play queen e1 to offer the queen trade. They've got a little work to do on their bishop, but I could just come to c3 and become really good. Black has to move c6 to send this knight somewhere less good because it doesn't have other great squares. I don't know. It looks playable. It looks playable. Something like this might be playable. What So does is he just trades this and then tries to defend here with development. Castle, d4. All right. After g5, knight f6. Yeah, knight f6 is definitely playable there after g5. At the end of that line. That is certainly a fair suggestion. Knight f6. And now neither side can castle, and the game goes on. Yeah. Yeah, it's not clear to me who's better or by how much in that position. I would guess that nobody has a massive advantage because it seems like both sides are able to bring out all their pieces. Yeah, it didn't feel like the game was like out of whack, let's say, or out of balance, right? So I think, however it was, it's not a huge advantage for whoever has the advantage. So knight f3, castles, d4. So here, Baskaran, d4, this is pretty aggressive. He's going for quickly trying to win this f4 pawn, but he's not defending e4, which is the square that's been weakened by black's play so far. And so he's allowing Wesley rook to e8 with this counterattack here, and things get complicated. I mean, alternatively, he can play a very simple move, d3, and threaten to take this with a piece. He can also play a move which might be really good, which is castles, saving the option of d3 or d4 depending on what black does. The possible problem with this would be that for one moment he's not threatening to take on f4, and black might be able to just play c6. Yeah. But, you know, even here, I mean, this is totally playable for white. Right? He's got these pawns versus these pawns. And he's lost his bishop pair. So it's just a complicated game. White's problem is kind of this piece. Maybe going queen d3, bishop d2. Maybe going for e5, bishop takes f4. Black might play g5 here to save this pawn against that threat. And... you know, you kind of just get a game. It's a complicated game. You know, but there's options for both sides in this. Right, this particular variation looks like this knight is getting super good. I think black might have to take on f3 here. At a time when the queen can't take because this pawn's hanging. And then oh, but white could, yeah, knight f6 check, you play queen takes f6. So here, knight d7. And now, I think white has the advantage here. I think this one's working out for white after h4. But, could be wrong. Could definitely be wrong. Okay. I mean, there's even like rook h3 could be weirdly promising. But you have to watch out for knight e5 as well. Oops, I just blundered that, right? Knight e5. I don't know if somebody already called that out in chat, but you know, we got to watch out for this. It's not all so easy and clear. You don't just get to do what you want. Yeah, so actually black's keeping the balance here. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so that's like a way to play. It seems possible. He could just castle. His other big option would be d3. And then I'm pretty sure black's going to try and hold on to this pawn with g5 and not just let white play like knight f4. Because I don't think... yes, black has an easy development in this position. He's broken with d5 in the center easily. But if he just plays a normal move like so and lets white play bishop f4 and whatever he intends to do from here, I just don't believe that black's going to have compensation for white's pawn center. You know, white's going to castle and have two pawns in the center against one f pawn. I think it's going to be pretty much lost for black. So you can't just flippantly give that pawn. So on d3, I think you're pretty much going to be forced to play g5. And then I have no idea what's going to happen. It does seem risky. I mean, white hasn't even castled kingside yet. He might be able to avoid castling kingside and go after black's kingside. Things could certainly get messy here. h4 is a candidate move. Queen to e2 with the idea of bishop d2 and just castling on the queen side. Bishop d2 with the idea of going to c3 quickly. Might force black to spend a tempo on c6 or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. Playable and interesting. g3 suggested by Arakido, also definitely a playable move here for white. Pretty exciting looking move. Yeah, if pawn to g4, this might be prime time to sack a piece and get an open g file, right? It might go here, here, and no here. F5 might be playable. We'll go back and look at that too, yeah. So it might be possible for white to do that on g4. fg3, bishop g5 looks good for white. g4. Knight h4 is playable. Knight h4 they might be able to take on g3. So you might have to go for the sack here. I don't know. And somebody's saying, what about f5 here? That seems playable. That seems playable. Because if white takes, you've got a tactic here that immediately wins back your pawn, so material stays equal. So you could play f5 here. And the critical line against f5 would probably be e5. And no, I don't know Subra's surprise. The point of like e5 here is to leave the f5 pawn blocking black's bishop and rook. But I think white fails tactically, right? This just doesn't work. Yeah, this is just not very good for white. The best I can do is like knight f4 or something, and it's not special. So f5 would be a pretty solid answer to d3 here. f5 or g5. Yeah, maybe on f5 white just needs to castle and then trade and trade. And the pieces come out for both sides, and whose pawn structure is better? It's a little tricky to say. Development's comparable. My guess would be that black is comfortable here because they have possibly the bishop pair, possibly the isolated pawn. I slightly prefer black's structure maybe. So I'm going to say probably slightly better for black, this variation here, but maybe close to equal. Why not take the bishop is because on knight e5, black has queen d5. And then like bishop e5, rook e8. And this, I was assuming this was going to fail tactically for white. Alternatively, you can play like knight f3, rook e8, check, king f2, and keep playing this position. Not completely unplayable, but not amazing. Okay. So Adhiban plays d4. It's the most aggressive move, but having just looked at d3 and castles, I wasn't impressed by either of those. So potentially d4 is the better move. Rook t8 comes through. And as somebody was already asking in advance, if black plays rook to e8, I forget who it was. Eclectic, I think, actually. Yeah, you were asking, on rook to e8 in this position, won't white just be able to play e5? And indeed, white will play e5. But it's still super complicated what follows. Okay, so because this pawn can't take on d6 right away, black has time to play some version of f6 and fight for the e5 square next. Right? And they're trying not to lose this pawn and just end up down a pawn for nothing. Okay? Here Wesley plays an important move, I think, with c6 versus just f6. He must have not wanted to let Adhiban play bishop f4 in one move, which is just such a strong move in the King's Gambit. To be able to, in one move, bring the bishop from c1 to f4 and control his e5 pawn. It's just so good. And the odds are that black can't quite find equality in this position, for example. Let's try some moves for black. So he manages to win the e5 pawn back, right? As white wins the pawn on f4. But finds himself immediately in a tactical loss, queen here, and back rank mate. And notice that even if white didn't have back rank mate, white has knight c7. White has rook to d1 with a probable big advantage. And what is white's advantage in this, coming out into this position? It's basically that this knight versus this knight. That's the big advantage. So what you can understand is that basically black's gotten a little bit behind on development, and that's what white's advantage is based on, and that can really be traced directly to allowing white to play this amazing bishop takes f4 move. The dream of every King's Gambit player is to safely play bishop takes f4 and come out, with their center intact and their piece didn't have to sit on c1 all game. So this is probably going to turn out badly for black, actually. So what Wesley does is first he plays c6, chasing Adhiban's knight. So now he's got to choose where to go with the knight. If the knight retreats to c3, maybe he can play g5 now because there's no longer knight f6 at some point. But maybe his plan is still just to play f6. Let's see. f6. Bishop f4. Taking, let's say, and here, and here, and here, and here. Huh. Seems like white's just up a pawn for very minimal compensation. Knight e4 coming at some point to help prove that the knights are not really worse than the bishops in this position. Okay, so why doesn't he retreat knight c3? Is there anything wrong with it? I'll just say, in the game, what Adhiban does here is he plays knight takes f4. That's the logical move is to take your pawn back with the knight. But if you really, really, really want to play this bishop f4 move, then, which you do, then you have to also consider knight to c3. I mean, is g5 worth looking at? Or should I keep looking at f6? What's the plan here? Maybe c5? This is a weird move, but let's try it for a second. c5. Takes. Knight c6, I have queen takes d6. Bishop c5, I have queen c5. Bishop e5, I can take. There's no check here, because bishop d4, the queen escapes. So rook takes, knight e5. Just saw out the window a homeless person walking by collecting recycling, and it just breaks my heart. Anyway, this would break black's heart to lose a piece like this. Queen d4, bishop c7, trade off, get the bishop out here. White's up a pawn and black has no compensation. And yeah. So far, knight c3 looks pretty good, right? As opposed to Adhiban's knight f4. F6, bishop f4. I mean, I don't know that attacking it with the knight is going to be enough, right? Just black doesn't have enough to take this, does he? Queen d8 wins a piece again, just the same. And you can throw in queen b6 check, but I'm guessing that somehow there will be problems for black at the end of this too. I mean, I should be careful. I shouldn't move too fast here. I don't want to miss my chance to beat black here, but let's say I do it like this and then play queen h5, right? No, g6. Ugh, almost found it. Queen e2 is my other possible move. Okay. Let's try this. This. I was hesitating because black has this kind of crazy defense here. But now, what I'm thinking is, you play into this whole thing, and then at the end, you play queen f2 for white, maybe? Whichever way black takes, they get back rank, mate it again, like you guys have already seen, right? So you should be experts on this. So this move here to defend queen f7. Do we have a win? Or does black survive? With a rook sack on f8? Did I miss something? Oh, rook f8! You did it! You did it, Ecliptic! Oh, that's so sweet. That's highlight reel right there. Rook f8. Yes. Like the South African group. Dis Antwoord. Antwoord. That's the answer right there. Rook f8. A favorite group of Jeremy Silman's. So if rook f8, bishop takes queen and you win. And if king takes, queen slides over here. And then you win. Oh, nice job, man. Oh, man. Well, that's got to make your day, right? That you spotted that move. I mean, it almost makes my day that you spot. It does make my day that you spotted that move. So it should do it for you too. Man. You guys see how tricky this is? But this is like, white has a good chance of winning with one of these kind of tactics as black trades everything off on e5. Because again, they're just down this tempo of not, you know, white having played bishop f4 in one move and getting ahead in development. There's all these back rank mate kind of tactics. So I think this move, queen e2, just like straight up wins. I don't think black has any other defense. This was all I was worried about, was queen b2, bishop e5, and then queen c3. I mean, some other defense, they can try and defend this with like a piece, right? But then they just get everything all tied up. And it should be curtains. Whether the queen's on c7 or a5 or whatnot. Yeah, it's just not happening for black, I don't think. So, okay. I mean, we're not going to spend like 10 hours on this. But what do you guys think? Like, I think knight c3 looks like very possible strong improvement for white. We haven't even looked at g5, which you guys kind of recoiled against. Yeah, I haven't made another move after g5. We kind of said it might be a move here, and then we just left it at that. Because, you know, then what happens is white plays like, you know, maybe knight e4, bishop e7, and like h4. I mean, we could get into this. I don't think this is like guaranteed unplayable for black. This might work out. This might be playable. Pieces aren't worth anything unless they're active. Yeah. Very blunt from Gary. I don't know. Maybe like g5 is what we need to look at for black here. But I definitely think knight c3 looks pretty promising. And like, I would not be unhappy to try and make this position here work from white's perspective. You know, black having to come here to cover these squares has decreased a lot of the pressure on e5. And I feel like having traded our light squared bishop for a knight, we've got a good chance of cracking this structure, which would mean playing the amazing move bishop f4, which you guys now have learned a little bit why bishop f4 is so darn good in the King's Gambit. I mean, it's kind of obvious why it would be good, but now you've seen some like examples of how like you get to play bishop f4 and then black's just like down a pawn, can't do anything, can't fight your center. Everything they try, there's some like winning tactic for white because white's up in development suddenly. So anyway, h4, and this could be interesting. You know, if black takes, then after bishop f4, our center is pretty superstar. After h4, if they play h6, then we start looking at tactics like takes, this knight takes, bishop takes, queen h5. And maybe black has the defense, but it looks darn scary, right? Actually, their defense might be bishop f6. What the heck? I better be able to beat that defense. It's this stupid queen. Well, I can get a pawn-up ending for white at least. With queen h8, trade queens, rook e8, knight d6, take their bishop, bishop f4. It's a clear advantage for white. But actually, perhaps better than taking this piece is to just play the move which you guys now know is the super strong move in the King's Gambit. Just play bishop f4. Don't take this piece. Don't play knight f6 with check and let their queen take it. Just play bishop f4. You've got castles queenside, queen h7, bishop h6, and rook f1 coming. This should be a winning position for white, actually, I would guess. Bishop f4 is the way to go. And 3D chess, you play black against the King's Gambit. You know what's up. You're like, I never let white play bishop f4 in one move. Never. Yeah, there's this option here to just take on f4 with the bishop and play this position down a piece. So this knight g5 sack. This is like a classic sack and should probably be good for white, but I'm not going to promise it without calculating it out. But like very, very high chance it's good for white. Then there's g4 as a move, which has its own set of patterns. Again, you could play bishop f4 and just sack here. Is playable. More likely you would play knight g5. But then if black chooses to play h6 here, you're kind of sacking anyway. Right? Now you're kind of headed for bishop f4 takes. This version of the sack probably. Bishop f5 might like leave black just covering everything just fine. So I don't know. There's also a version where you go knight f7, king f7, bishop f4. This is also something that gets played. So anyway, there's some potential there for both sides. There's no guarantee who's going to come out ahead in this fight, but I think this knight c3 move looks like super interesting. And yeah, so again, to get back to what Adhiban played, he took on f4 with his knight, and then Wesley played f6 coming after here. So now Adhiban, defends his center pawn with knight to d3, takes, and this position comes about. Now, according to the analysis I heard, like Adhiban could have maybe gotten a slight edge, but I do not like this approach actually for white, this position here. Here's the thing, like both of these knights are trying to control a dark square from being on light squares. That's not how you want to fight against a light squared bishop, right? You want to like outpost your knights on dark squares and control the light squared bishop. So, so here, it's very easy for this bishop to trade off one of the knights and win back control over e5 and win back the pawn. Additionally, like just sort of not being castled and twirling that knight around a bunch of times, I'm not pumped about. So I do not really like what Adhiban did here, and I expected that So would get a good position, but supposedly it was not so clear. Queen e2 going for bishop c5. Bishop e3, sorry, going for bishop e3. Bishop f5, bishop e3, and now he moves the queen. So here, let me just calculate this because I didn't before. We should also, yeah, let's calculate this. Bishop d3. I'm pretty sure the plan is pawn takes d3 because queen takes d3. There's two options here. No, there's really only one. You got to take on b2, I think. Bishop c5 looks interesting, like trying to keep white from castling, but they'll trade here and then just castle on the queen side, and then black's lost, right? Like they're down a pawn and they can't even play knight d7. So resign. and knight g5 is even a threat already. So I guess we got to go queen b2. If pawn takes, then queen takes. So probably white just castles here with their rook hanging. Now, probably need to try and grab this pawn. Risky as it is. It looks really risky. Oh la la. This looks really risky for black. So, you know, at first I was just thinking rook b1, b7, and like, yeah, that doesn't look like a party. But actually, knight g5 might just win the game instantly. It's funny because like you keep thinking that there's like pressure here. There's this like barely defended piece, so you want to make some tactics like with bishop d4, rook b1, knight e5, bishop d4. But actually, I think the move knight g5 just ends the game. You're threatening mate in 1. I mean, unless black's going to start playing like bishop h2 check, they basically only have g6. Then you've got queen c4, and I mean somewhere around here it's time to resign. That's it. Probably this as the follow-up. Okay, so we're going to resign for black, this one actually. So actually queen d3 might be playable too here. Queen b2 and just castle. Shoot. What are you doing, black? What are you doing, Wesley? I guess Wesley didn't do this. What am I doing, David? I'm destroying Wesley's beautiful game. Yeah, I mean, this bishop's threatened. If it can't take on e5, then we're playing some stupid retreat with it, and there's still knight g5 will win just as hard. So yeah, I mean, bishop e7 to try and stop knight g5, but then white just plays rook b1, queen somewhere stupid, and, you know, rook b7 and so forth. And white's up a pawn, and his position is like 1,000 times better. So it's winning. It's lost already. Huh. Queen d3. I would not have seen that coming. Huh, so bishop e3. Man. I wanted to be able to trade on d3 to potentially do this bishop c5. It looks like nothing works out for black. I mean, maybe I'm missing an important move for black, but... A couple of people have asked when this video will be on YouTube. I mean, first of all, it's immediately in my Twitch video library as soon as I end the broadcast. And then maybe tonight I'll get around to like clipping out the key parts and putting some of them on YouTube. I'm not going to put the whole thing on YouTube, but probably all the Adhiban games are going onto YouTube, and the tactics and blitz games I don't usually post to my YouTube channel. I can't seem to make this work for white. I don't know what Wesley... Yeah, I mean, Adhiban seems to just successfully ward all this off and get castled. Queen a6. Okay, knight needs defense. I guess Wesley's done well. I mean, he's like weakened the light squares a little bit, got his queen into position to win the a pawn at some point, so he's not down a pawn. Then bishop d4 is like an obvious mistake after c5. That was just like a blunder. Because if you take, there's bishop d3 and you lose a piece. So this is where like Adhiban could have maybe improved with, I would assume bishop f4 would be the better move. Maybe I shouldn't assume anything. You could potentially have the advantage as white even if black takes on a2 if you're really strong in the center and start kicking all the black pieces to bad squares. Like if somehow this is the best that black can do, and then you can play knight d4, and you know, then you're playing like e6 and stuff. White could definitely still have an advantage here. Can I take with the queen? No, I lose this pawn. Can I take here? I hope I don't still lose this pawn. Yeah, I don't. Okay, so I can at least play like this for white. I mean, does white have an advantage? I guess so. I guess they've got an advantage. I mean, there's no bishop pair. The pawn on e5 looks more strong than weak to me at this point. And there's potential for white's rooks to be stronger than black's rooks. There's tactics on the king side. You know, rook h3 or g3, queen h5, knight f5, e6. Yeah, I mean, white's better here. Unless black can take this way instead of the other way, and then here there's this, and you can't take on e8. And then bishop takes with the rook. And now white's down a pawn. That would change things around a bit, huh? Yeah, that refutes it all. Not so easy. Not so easy. In fact, this loses the pawn for white. Okay, so there's no knight to d4 here, actually. That makes it harder to show a good position for white. I'm going to have to do something weird. I don't know. It looks overall still playable for Wesley So here, I think. So yeah. I mean, Adhiban like definitely got like a game out of it. First of all, he wasn't worse. He played the King's Gambit, he wasn't worse. That's already good. It seems like his whole idea of playing d4 here and then pushing e5, it seems like this was justified. Like, he had definitely a playable game in this game. You know, he was threatening to be better throughout, threatening to hold on to this pawn. You know, it feels like Wesley was defending. And on top of that, I mean, I think the best alternative that we haven't looked at is not for Wesley, but for Adhiban to even improve with knight c3. So I don't know if this line actually is that great for black. This is just trading on d5 and then bishop d6. That might not actually be good. This knight takes d5 move. It feels a little bit not good, to be honest, this knight takes d5 move, because it brings the white knight into striking distance of your f-pawn, so you have to defend it. And it also trades off this like awkward piece that often has to retreat because of, you know, this is supposed to be awkward and frozen from the knight. So I wonder if knight d5 is maybe not like as good as bishop to b4 all the way back here. And then, yeah, I mean, just logically, the move knight d5 could be a mistake. Like, there's a chance that it just doesn't quite balance out right. So, yeah, well, that's my last Adhiban game for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the little review there through some unusual e4 openings, as well as